Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for a conversation on innovation in the creative writing classroom. My name is Joshua Garcia. I am the managing editor of Teachers and Writers Magazine, which is a free online resource for teachers of creative writing. We have been published since 1967, so we've been around for a while by Teachers and Writers Collaborative, one of the first writers in the schools organizations that now has over 50 years history of delivering creative writing programs that increase access to the arts, build community, and amplify youth voices. In our conversation today, we'll hear from the winners of the 2025 Bechtel Prize. Each year, Teachers and Writers Magazine awards the Bechtel Prize for an essay describing a teaching experience, project, or activity that demonstrates innovation in creative writing instruction. This year's winners were selected by poet and teacher Chen Chen, and you can learn more about the Bechdel Prize at our website, which I am linking in the chat as we speak. Each of the writers with us today, their essays all display a deep empathy for their students, and I am very much looking forward to getting into conversation, hearing what they have to say, and learning more about their approaches to teaching creative writing. Just before we fully begin, I want to encourage everybody to take advantage of the Q&A feature on Zoom. You should have like a little Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will have time for questions toward the end of the hour, but I encourage you, as your questions come to you, please go ahead and just drop them in the Q&A box so that they're ready for us when we're ready for Q&A. Now to begin, I'll introduce our panelists, and each of our panelists will read an excerpt from their essay after I introduce them. So first up, we have Kristen Moraine, who was selected by Chen Chen as the first place winner of the 2025 Bechtel Prize for her essay, A Place for Us, Student Poetry That Looks Back to Move Forward. Kristen Moraine is an author and English teacher living in the Pacific Northwest with her family. Her work has appeared previously in Teachers and Writers Magazine, and her fiction, essays, and poetry have been featured in Literary Mama, OnePotato.com, The Gyroscope Review, and elsewhere. Moraine earned an MFA in creative writing from the University of San Francisco, and she is currently seeking representation for her contemporary YA novel. Of Moraine's essay, Chen shared, "This work manages to be timely without being narrow in its focus. Perhaps history-minded is a better way to describe this essay's powers. History-minded and dream-oriented. It asks of us a better question than what I started with. It asks, how can we, as teachers and students, create hope out of reading, writing, and being in community?" So please join me in welcoming Kristen Moraine as she shares an excerpt from her essay.
Thank you so much, Joshua, for hosting us today. And thank you to Teachers and Writers Magazine and author Chen Chen for selecting our essays and giving all of us a chance to highlight what we do in our classrooms. I also wanted to say, Anna and Peter, congratulations to you both. Your work was inspiring and amazing, and it is a pleasure to be in your company today. So I'll begin by reading just a little bit from my essay, and then I'll talk a little bit about the prompts and how I use them. It's difficult to use the words hope and gratitude in the classroom these days without feeling a rose-tinted blush. Our social and political trials seem to be mounting ever upward rather than evening out. And my students, many of them just shy of voting age, are furious with laws and practices that strike them as antiquated and outrageous. I don't always know what to say to my students after a disappointing headline comes across our news feeds. It'll get better rings hollow, and we've been here before doesn't offer much comfort to anyone. In moments like these, I lean on the wisdom of literary giants like Alice Walker. I'm lucky that for most of my career, I worked in a school that never questioned the color purple as a core text, so Walker's work has always been part of my curriculum. But lately, Walker's books have been banned in many schools in our country, which means an essential American voice is missing from many American classrooms. How can we possibly overcome our present and future obstacles without the wisdom of the thinkers and writers who came before us? Writers like Alice Walker gave us a lamp to guide our path forward, and we're fools to put it down. At least there is always light in poetry. And last time I checked, Alice Walker's poem Women wasn't banned anywhere. I teach it every year. Women and the prompt I pair it with would work well in a larger unit, but I often teach it on its own. I think of it as a break glass in case of emergency sort of activity that I turn to when my students need it most. Today is that day. The news outside the classroom is awful, and the previous unit on Shakespeare's Hamlet has left us in a daze. After too much talk of Ophelia, I want my students to hear from a strong woman describing other strong women. I pull Alice Walker's Women from my drawer. So here I'm going to pause for just a second so that I can actually show everyone Walker's poem. Any chance I have to put her words in front of people, I take. So here is her poem, Women by Alice Walker. You can see this is a short poem with lots of vivid images and quick and jammed lines. And I like that it's pretty accessible for most readers. What I'm hoping students will notice right away is how much admiration Walker has for her mother's generation, for their strength and determination to engage in a battle for equality and education, not knowing how it's going to turn out, but fighting anyway. Students usually pick up on Walker's use of battle imagery here and some of her language that flips gender stereotypes. So all that usually leads to really rich discussion about fighting for change and progress, what defines us, and what real strength is. So after some time talking about Walker's words, it's time for the students to write their own poem about their parents' generation. I tell them first to just make a list of words to describe their mom or their dad or their grandparent. What images come to mind? What sounds? And when you look at Walker's poem here, it's not a list, but the structure kind of visually calls a list to mind. So that's why I feel like this is a good place to begin. I also think my more reluctant writers, who don't always enter into a creative writing prompt with a lot of enthusiasm, they feel like they can handle just bullet pointing words to begin, right? That's easy enough. And everybody loves a word bank. So once everyone has their lists, I give students a chance to share with each other and talk about where there's maybe some overlap with their lists. Students usually end up adding more words to their lists after they have a chance to kind of think out loud and talk. But then I bring students back to Walker's opening line here. They were women then. But I read on the board, they were blank then. I tell them to begin their own poems with this opener, but fill in the blank with a word that describes their parents' generation. I give a few other pointers and remind them they already have that word bank. Then I start the timer for about 10-ish minutes. So in my essay, I give a couple of examples of the really memorable poems that I've seen come out of this activity over the years. Some are really lovely poems about hardworking moms and dads, and others are more critical. They express frustration with what has or hasn't happened in previous generations. This attention to the battles that still need us might be why I added a second poem to this activity a few years into teaching it. The second poem is a follow-up to the first one about parents, but this poem is about the student's own generation. So I take them through those same first steps, make a list of words and images, but this time it's words that describe who they think they are as a generation and how society perceives them. Then I write on the board, they say we are blank now. It turns out students have a lot to say about this, and they usually want to write for more than 10 minutes. Um, I like putting these two poems together because they give students a chance to think critically about what came before and what it all means now. Which battles brought us to this place, and who should we thank for the progress we've made? And even more important, how far do we still need to go? And how can we lift up the generations that will come after us? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you for reading and sharing. Next up on our panel is Anna Dunleavy, who was selected by Chen Chen as the runner-up for the 2025 Bechtel Prize for her essay, Call Me by My Name, Poetry and Translanguaging in the Multilingual Classroom. Anna Dunleavy is a teacher and writer. She has taught English as a new language and English language arts at schools in the Bronx and Brooklyn, as well as in Lille, France, through the Teaching Assistant Program in France. She studied creative writing and modern languages at Kenyon College and obtained her master's in TESOL at the City College of New York. Her work has appeared in the Key West literary seminar blog, Littoral. In her essay, Dunleavy writes, "As a teacher of English as a new language, I believe in creating a space in which all language is valued and no language is deemed improper for the classroom." Armed with a poem by Judith Ortiz Coffer, Dunleavy facilitates a classroom where the voices and languages of her students are honored and collaboration is key to each other's learning. Please join me in welcoming Anna Dunleavy as she shares an excerpt from her essay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Joshua. Thank you, Kristen and Peter. It's an honor to be here with you. I'm excited to share with you all an excerpt from my essay. I was still expected to follow the same 7th grade curriculum that the English language arts teachers followed. The majority of my 17 students have been living in the United States for more than 1 year, and therefore would have to take the same state English language arts test as every other 7th grader, without modifications. I'd been criticized in an observation for not having enough student-to-student discussion, even though these students were all beginners to learning the English language, and most of them did not have another person in the class who spoke the same home language. In another observation, where I tried to group the few students who spoke the same home language together, I was criticized for their discussions not being in English. The thing that frustrated me the most out of all of this was the text I was supposed to be teaching. An excerpt from Call Me Maria by Judith Ortiz Coffer. That excerpt starts with a poem that contains both English and Spanish. In the poem, Maria uses similes and metaphors, along with translanguaging, to describe her feelings about moving to New York with her father, leaving her mother and her home of Puerto Rico behind. The entire 7th grade was learning about a character who embraced speaking multiple languages, but my own students were not supposed to use any language other than English. I was also in graduate school at the time, and in one of my classes, I was learning about a concept called translanguaging, developed by Professor Ofelia Garcia. Translanguaging means that named languages have no linguistic reality. Instead, we each create a unique linguistic repertoire where all words we know from any language and vernacular hold equal weight and importance, and can and should be used in all contexts. I recognized Judith Ortiz Coffer's use of translanguaging principles to write the character Maria, and I realized that I could use translanguaging in connection with Call Me Maria to create an accessible and meaningful creative writing project for my students that would allow them to work in both English and their home languages. First, I decided to scrap the entirety of Call Me Maria from my unit plan, except for that poem. Instead of my students having a muddled and half-baked knowledge of the entire text, they would know that poem and know it well, especially the following section. Sometimes when I feel like a bird soaring above all that is ugly or sad, I am Maria Alegre. Other times, when I am like a small underground creature, when I feel like I will never see the sun again, I am Maria Triste. My mother used to call me her Paloma her dove when I was alegre, and her ratoncita, her little mouse, on the days when I was triste. Today I am neither. You can just call me Maria. I used this poem to introduce translanguaging to my students. To make the concept more accessible, I equated it to buying an expansion pack in a video game. Everything from the original game is still there, and everything from the original game is still valuable. But now the player has more tools to work with. It's the same with learning a new language. We read the poem multiple times. My students became familiar with both the English and the Spanish words, the two Spanish speakers in the classroom becoming the appointed experts for pronunciation. I thought it was important for my students to watch me stumble over the Spanish, to let their peers correct me with a smile and a laugh. It helped us all relax, to see that even the teacher needed to learn. So then I continue on in the essay to describe how I work in similes and metaphors, how it's a bit tricky at first to do similes and metaphors with students learning a new language because you're working on describing yourself literally, but then you have to do the figurative element of saying that you're not really something, you're just like something. So that was a bit tricky for them to learn, but then they were able to have some fun with it as well. And then we continued to use translanguaging throughout the year. I would allow them to turn in assignments that were partially in English, partially in another language. And often that actually led to them turning in whole assignments in English, sometimes using words here or there if they couldn't quite think of a word that would fit what they needed to say. But mostly they were able to use that their home language as a bridge into learning English. And I was kind of coming back to this lesson plan because I now teach English language arts. This was my first year of teaching English language arts. So I was kind of thinking about how I can make a curriculum my own, how I can take something that's already been established and put my own spin on it. And so that's what led to me reflecting on this lesson and led to me thinking of ways that I have in the past taken something that's already been established and making it my own.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much. And finally, we have Peter Marcus. Uh, Peter Marcus was selected by Chen Chen as the honorable mention for the 2025 Bechtel Prize for his essay, "In the Beginning Was the Word, and the Word was Blue, Exploring the Blues Through Poetry and Song." Peter Marcus is the senior writer with Inside Out Literary Arts in Detroit. His book, Inside My Pencil, Teaching Poetry in Detroit Public Schools, offers readers an inside look at his approach in the classroom. Over the years, his essays on teaching have appeared with some regularity in Teachers and Writers magazine. His other books include the book of poems When Our Father Returns to Us as Birds, published by Wayne State University Press, as well as the novel Bob or Man on a Boat, or Man on Boat, and a book of stories We Make Mud, both published by Dzonk Books. He has a new book of poems, The River at the End of the River, coming out from Dzonk in the fall of 2026. In Marcus's essay, he begins his class by first asking his students what the color blue is. What follows is a thoughtful and compassionate exchange between a teacher and his students, leading to a lesson on the blues in poetry. Please join me in welcoming Peter Marcus.
Thank you, Joshua. I also want to thank Kristen for this sentence, always light in poetry, which I hope we can go back to during our conversation. And then Anna's sentence, even the teacher needed to learn. So I'm just going to read the opening sort of movement of this essay on blue and the blues. I write the word blue on the blackboard. We go around the room and begin talking about blue. What's blue? I say. A color, says a boy. Okay, I say, let's talk about blue as a color. How many different kinds of blue are with us in the world? Sky blue, says a girl. Her eyes are not blue, but brown. There are no blue eyes in this classroom gazing back at me. Outside the classroom's window, the sky is gray, overcast, flush with clouds. What else? I wait for someone to speak, to break the silence. One thing I've learned in my 30 years of teaching, my 58 years of living, it's okay for there to be silence. I smile, I don't speak. Finally, one boy looks around the room, moves his head from side to side, and looks behind him, then says, "Isn't anybody going to say something?" "You just did," I say. "Thank you." Then I ask, "What else is something blue in the world besides the sky?" "My granddad's got a blue Cadillac," he says. His name, Trishan. He's the young writer behind the poem, "Love is a Big Blue Cadillac." Love is a big blue Cadillac, Trishan writes, that never runs out of gas. He drives all night down to Mississippi to see his wife. I watch them kiss. When they kiss, the sun rises like a gigantic cherry, turning the whole universe red. Maybe Cadillac blue is a kind of blue, I suggest. What else is the color blue? I go on. I'm always going on, urging, digging, asking my students to look around at the world, to make use, to imagine. Close your eyes if you have to, I say. What's something blue that you see there? "I see a blue house," says a boy who doesn't often talk unless he is called on to talk. "Good," I say. "Tell me more about this blue house," I say. I'm always looking for that one small detail to believe in. "It's a sad house," he says. He doesn't say anything more. So I dig deeper. What makes a house sad? I ask. "There's no one," he says, looking straight at me, as if he is looking into me or right through me. Maybe he is seeing me as the man I sometimes fear that I am on a bad day. "There's no one," he tells me, "living inside this house." I press my right hand up against my heart. I shake my head. Yes, I'm being dramatic. Sometimes we have to be dramatic to make sure it's clear that we are listening. "That's a sad house," I say. I want to say, "I bet you all live in a happy house," but I don't go there. Not every house with people living inside it is a happy house, I know. What else? I say. I say these two words often. What else? There is always something else to be said. What else what? Somebody says. I say to this without missing a beat. What else is something blue? More silence. I listen to the ticking away silence of something blue. If I told you to pull out your crayon box, I say, and draw a picture of something blue, what would that something be? Now they seem to get it, to see what I am getting at. Sometimes these things take time. We must take the time. It's good to take things slow. Poetry teaches us this. This is something I've learned over the years. This is something I believe. "A bird," one boy says, "can be blue." "A river," adds somebody else. "My shirt is blue," says somebody else. And it's true. I'm looking out at a sea of collared shirts that are all the same color blue. Now we're getting somewhere. "The sweater you sometimes wear is blue," recalls a boy with his blue shirt buttoned up to his throat. "There's a blue dog on TV," says a girl with blue marbled hair ties pulling her hair back into braids. When I point this out to her, she reaches up with her hands to see what she can't see herself. We laugh, or most of us do. A tear, says a girl who is not among those of us laughing. What's that? I ask. I look into her eyes, half moons where others are gazing at me full. A tear, she repeats, but I still don't hear it. I still don't see what she is saying. I'm picturing a tear, a rip, like the tear I have in my winter coat from where my cat caught his claw and my jacket ripped. It's now patched with a piece of black duct tape to keep the goose feathers from falling out. A tear, she says a third time, like when someone's sad, like when someone is crying, you know? Ah, yes, I say. I nod my head slow. I do know. Now I get it. Thank you for saying so. So if you were to draw a picture of a tear running down a little girl's face, that tear would be the color blue. I keep nodding my head. I want her to see and to know that I'm listening, my head telling her, I hear you. That's all any of us ever really wants, isn't it? To be heard, our voices, our hearts. Um, so from there, I just sort of establish, I guess, this entry point by asking this very accessible question about the color blue and what else is blue, which then leads to blue as a feeling, like if I were to say I'm feeling blue, what does that mean? They all know what that means, right? And then that sort of leads us into talking about the blues or I play a Lightning Hopkins song. I talk about B.B. King, which then leads us to listening to music, getting up and playing air guitar out of our seats, that invitation to play and to sort of just have a little fun because we want language and poetry to be fun. And then it leads to, well, what kind of blues is ours to say or to write about? I bring in a Langston Hughes, Richard Wright poem that they collaborated on about being sort of homesick. Established with the students, well, what might be, what are you homesick about, or even what does that mean to be homesick? They do a little writing around that question, which then leads us to writing about our blues and structuring a poem using repetition, using, establishing what's actually going on, what's happening in the world that's making us feel blue. And then, most importantly, and this isn't just in a single session, this is over several sessions that I would be working with these students. The important thing, well, what do we do with that feeling if it doesn't go away, or how can we, other than writing about it and talking about it, how can we, um, you know, lift ourselves up out of the blues through playfulness, through some silliness. So there's some model poems in the essay where I encourage them to find creative ways to get rid of the blues.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you, all of you. There's so much wisdom in just those excerpts that you read. I would encourage everybody to read the rest of these essays. I've linked them all in the chat. And you can find them all at teachersandwritersmagazine.org. So to just kind of open up conversation, I want to ask a general question of all of you, and feel free to answer in whichever order you would like. But I was just wondering if you could each share a little about the inspiration behind the lessons that you write about in your essays. I'd also be curious to know why you chose to write about these lessons in particular, as opposed to the many others that I'm sure you teach, and if there were any special considerations that either helped develop these ideas or that you incorporated into these lessons.
I can jump in if you want. Okay. Um, so I had a feeling, Joshua, you were going to ask about like how we were inspired by this, right? And so I was thinking about the very first time I saw this poem, Alice Walker's poem, and I think the first time I gave it to students, it probably came across my desk from one of my friends and colleagues at the school where I worked for a very long time, SI in San Francisco. So shout out to my friends at SI. Um, but I don't think I started teaching this poem with the intention of it turning into a creative writing exercise. I think I just needed that poem, and I had a feeling my students did. And then the exercise came to be in a way that I think is always the best way. The students sort of, our conversation kind of led us there. I remember this was probably back in 2017, maybe even 2016, but I remember a kid saying, it's really so great that she like wrote this poem about her mom, how awesome. And someone else said, yeah, we should do that. And then someone said, challenge accepted. And then one, many were annoyed because they could see that I was like, wait, we should do this. So I made them write immediately, but I didn't have all the processes and the, lists and kind of different scaffolding that would make it really accessible for all kinds of writers later. But we tried it that day, and it felt really like good enough to everybody in the room that I wanted to keep coming back to it. And then I added the other step later of us writing about ourselves, because every generation feels misunderstood, right? So I think that kind of inspired the activity in the first place. Why did I write about this in January? To be honest, I was really frustrated just with what was going on in the world, and I think it took me a while to write this essay in a way that didn't really sound angry, that kind of returned to hope. And I feel like poetry really does do that for us. It kind of grounds us in our common feeling, whether it's the blues or something lighter and hopeful. But I think that I really needed that when I started writing this essay, and then I remembered how it did that for my students as well. And so that's kind of why I decided to talk about it this year.
Nice.
It was because this was the first lesson, the one that I wrote about. It was the first lesson that I taught that I was like, yes, this one is definitely coming back next year. This is a good, solid lesson. I had just been doing a lot of trial and error, a lot of trying and failing, feeling like I kind of had it, kind of didn't. And this was the first one that I felt like I really, like, my students got it. I felt good teaching it. And I just felt like this was one that I was going to keep on coming back to. And I was looking back at old lessons, because as an ELA teacher now, English Language Arts, I felt like a new teacher all over again. So I was like, what did I do when I was a new teacher that I thought was good and solid and that worked for me? So I was coming back to that. I was also obviously reflecting on what's been happening in our country, in our world, thinking about how like we're kind of like, we hear people all the time saying like, you're in America, speak English, when really America has no language. Like, it's a place for everyone. All languages should be heard and accepted and spoken. And I was also kind of thinking about how in that like speak only English mindset, that kind of ends up being detrimental at times. I think that there's a bit of a misconception that if you're learning a new language, you have to only hear that one language. Otherwise, like if you, for instance, if you speak English and you're learning Spanish, you need to get yourself into a Spanish only environment. Otherwise, then you'll never truly learn Spanish. But actually, I took French when I was in high school and in college, and the best French class I ever took was one where we spoke English and French equally, and we compared French and English grammatical structures. We did lessons on like red herring words that sounded very similar in French and English, but were actually different. And it was using the two languages together that really helped me master French and really became my best French class. So I wanted to kind of do away with the notion of, oh, like you have to only speak English in order to learn English. And also the stigma with that if you learn English, you have to then lose any other languages that you know, because English is the most important language, when it's not. It's just another language to know, more words to know, more vocabulary to use, and more ways to express yourself.
Um, I guess I wrote about this particular sequence of moments, um, mainly because it's just sort of something that I do as a writer. I mean, I just sort of make use of my life, which is what I'm always telling my students to do. So when Joshua mentioned that my essays have appeared with some regularity in teachers writers over the years, that's true. Um, but that wasn't always the case. But I realized maybe about 6 or 7 years into my teaching career, I guess is what we'd call it, that that was a big part of my story. And when I'm encouraging my students, whether or not they're in third grade or adults, to tell their story, I realize that all the time, all the hours that I spend in the classroom is a big part of my story. So that's really I mean, there's nothing necessarily special about why I wrote about this particular lesson. The reason why I teach that lesson is a little bit different because it does, I think, fit a lot of the modes of connecting with kids, whether or not it's through accessibility, just by beginning by putting the word on the board and using language as a point of entry to teach and to reach all 30 odd students in a classroom by asking a very accessible, simple question: what is blue? What else is blue? So that's really the reason why that I use um, or I, teach this lesson that then leads to poetry, that leads to song, that leads to talking about feelings, that leads to us talking about the fact that everybody in this room with us, you know, feels down at times, and then how collectively we can lift each other up through song and poems. So that's the real reason why I teach that sequence of events, and then wrote about it too, I guess.
I really love that teaching and your story are integrated. I like that a lot. So I have plenty of other questions, but I do want to first, before I ask more of my questions, ask if any of you have questions for each other by chance. No pressure.
I do have a question for both of you, Kristen and Peter. So, in both of your essays, you both talk about kind of sitting in the silence of a question and just kind of letting the question kind of sit there for a minute and not rushing in to validate it or rushing in to follow up, and just letting students think and letting them come to an answer in their own time. And that's something that I really struggle with. So I was just wondering, like, how have you come to like how have you come to be better at that and using that in your classroom? And then how do you think that it improves your students' writing if they have that time to just sit and think in that silence?
That's a good question. And I loved what Peter said about, what else and waiting and then what else. I think that was really hard for me, honestly. My very first few years of teaching, I always would rush to fill the silence because it just felt like, oh my God, no one's talking. What do I do? Or I would be quick to just kind of call on the first hand, the kind of like the kid in the front who always is ready to go. Um, I think that more time and more practice sort of just had me feeling way more comfortable with just letting the silence be what it is. And it always surprises me what ends up coming out of that silence. And so I think I've had so many great payoffs over the years from just being more patient and waiting. And I even tell the students that too, that, I'm going to wait. I'm not going to fill the silence because I know you're thinking things and I want to give you that time to think your things and then bring it. And so it just, but I'll admit it really took me a long time to feel like that was okay, like a good use of time to just wait in the quiet. So I don't know, Peter. if you
Yeah,
have
that's,
something.
I mean, what you said is right on the spot. You have to practice it. It's a skill that you learn, and new people to the classroom, um, are nervous about silence, I mean, it's awkward and, my job is to teach and to use words and all that stuff, but sometimes you just have to sit with it, listen to it, and give the kids even just like a little bit of some breathing room and a bit of a reprieve from always just a bombardment of language and instructions. And like, I don't know, like the classroom, in any room that I've ever been in, when there's too much language, I get overwhelmed by it myself. Like, whether or not it's a meeting or something, it's just I need time to just sit. And I think poetry invites us to just sit with the quiet and listen. But you're right, Anna. It is like it's sort of like, oh, geez, I must be doing something wrong if I don't have anything to say. But it's not that you don't have anything to say, right? It's just that just sort of like, well, let's wait until the students have something to say and can then direct the next thing that gets said. And you said it perfectly in your essay when you mentioned that we need to learn these things with our students. And I love telling that to, little 9-year-old kids, like, you guys are teaching me probably more than I'm teaching you. And I think that's true of any group in any kind of learning environment. So, and I think it's important just to establish that, and embrace it, and to not know all the answers.
Mhm.
I had a question for you, Anna, because I loved in your essay, you explain beautifully what translanguaging is and how it's so useful. And then I loved your paragraph where you talk about the students then start exchanging swear words in their home languages. And of course, that's what happens, right? And so I loved that. And I also felt in that description that like there must have been a sense of community in your classroom that they then felt comfortable to just kind of go for it. And so I wondered if, I don't know, as you're thinking about how you're going to plan next year, do you feel like starting with an activity like this, with a translanguaging activity, and inviting that sort of conversation early on, will that kind of build your classroom community? Do you think you're going to use that again and like early in your school year? I don't know. What do you think?
It will be a bit tricky to do it now because now I don't have as many multilingual students in my classroom. I have a lot of students who grew up just speaking English, but I do know that they still do like communicate in other languages. Like most of the students that they speak another language, they speak Spanish, and then it'll be like sometimes I'll like be like, Miss, he said something about my mom. It's like, but you don't speak Spanish. How do you know that he was insulting your mom? And it's because they already know the curse words and stuff. So I know that they are communicating in these ways. And I know that they have like other like forms of communication. But I think that the way that I'm going to go forward with this for ELA is just using slang and using words that are usually seen as like not classroom appropriate. Like just like saying like I'm trying to think of an
Gibbity,
example, but like
gibbity alpha, whatever they say these
oh my
days.
God, yes. Like or like saying like if one character is like, oh, like he's trying to like riz another character, and then they're like, oh, what? And then like they're like, oh, I can say that, I can use that word here. And then like it kind of helps relax it, just be like, oh, so I don't have to use only like fancy words. I don't have to use words that I've assumed that I can't pronounce, or words that I don't really know how to say, words I don't feel like myself using. So I really encourage that. I just speaking how you feel, writing how you talk, and just developing your voice in that way. So I think that's how I'll go forward with it, not necessarily with different languages, but just with different variations on the English language.
That's well said. To find your voice, you have to write the way you talk, or at least, to be open to that language. I didn't have a question, Joshua, but for Kristen, I wanted to maybe, the one thing that you had mentioned in your essay, once you use the Alice Walker, as a model poem, and then you bring in, because of so many of the powerful responses to that poem from students, to use your students or former students model, but you're sort of inviting these new students, which is brilliant. I mean, they probably are going to as much as that Alice Walker poem is powerful, the poem written in response to that Alice Walker poem by somebody down the hallway is even more powerful. And I just
Mhm.
thought it would be interesting to, because I find that student poems are the best model poems. So I'm
They
curious
absolutely
about
are.
that.
I agree. And I feel like with almost every creative writing prompt that I have returned to, I always have a little anecdote to give students to like, oh, I remember so and so. And, I don't always use a name, but I will just say a little bit about a student poem. And if I have permission from that student, I'll even share it. Um, and I remember a couple years ago, I had done this so many times. And I said, I don't know if it's annoying to you that I talk so much about my former students so much, that I share their work so much, but I think I'm telling you this because your words stay here long after you graduate and you move on. They have an impact on me. They have an impact on everybody that reads them after and everybody in the room. And so that I want them to know that what they put down on the page isn't just some silly activity, that it hits. And so I think it is really valuable to put those student poems right next to the greats like Alice Walker and others, and show them how much power they have when they write.
Yeah, yeah. Because the way that, the teaching that I do typically works is that I'll like migrate from one classroom to another in a building within the grade level. And then oftentimes I'll, walk from one classroom into the next with a sheet of loose leaf papers with words on it. And I'm going to then probably carry that lesson into the new classroom. And then right then I've got model poems. So then like they'll be like, oh, who wrote that? And then I'm leaving that classroom to go to the next classroom. Mr. Pete, are you going to read one of my poems to Miss So-and-so's class? Like, that's pretty cool. Like, when, now they're seeing themselves as writers. So
Absolutely.
I'm glad you're doing that. And
I have a question for Kristen, and then maybe I'd like to open it up to you, Anna, and Peter, if you have any thoughts to contribute. But Kristen, one of the things I really appreciated about your essay was how you open by situating us in the world that we live in, the kind of social and political anxiety that many of us are carrying. And then you have a lot of, I think, respect for the fact that your students are also carrying that, and we're all teachers and students are bringing things into the classroom from the world. And yeah, I'm just curious to hear how maybe that tension of, the outside world and the inside world of the classroom, um, how is that informing your pedagogy and how you approach the classroom these days?
I would say it informs everything. Um, it's hard to know exactly what to respond to day, and kind of reading the room to understand, like, okay, is today a day where we need to talk about the thing and be real honest and real? Is that going to be appropriate, or is today a day when we close the door and we're going to read a silly poem and completely be just here? So I think that is a struggle that is daily. I think probably Peter and Anna, you feel the same way. Like we can't ignore what's going on. We know our students are reacting to it all the time. So I can't say that I always feel that I do it with as much grace as I would like, because I am human, and I sometimes feel really upset and angry. But I think even just being honest with my students about that, like, hey, I'm feeling a little bit frustrated today. So what do we want to do? How do we want to handle this today, and what do we want to talk about? Um, so I think that's one way that I handle it. And then I think I really do, as I said in my essay, I really do come back to poetry often. These like these quick kind of words from another moment, maybe in history that was also really difficult, can kind of make me feel more grounded in, all right, here's what's hard, but here's where the hope is. I think that that helps me, and I try to bring that to students whenever I can. I have this line that I've been kind of holding on to, and it's not my line, but I thought it was great. It was from an author named Paula Yoon, I think. Yes, Paula Yu. She said at AWP this year that people like to say history repeats itself, but hope also repeats itself. And I've been kind of replaying that in my mind, and I bring that to my classes as well. And so, when we read great poetry and literature, they're often stories of struggle, stories of sorrow and pain, but kind of the undercurrent of all of them is hope and resilience. And I think the more we can share that with students, the more we can help them deal with what's happening now.
Yeah, thank you. Anna or Peter, do you have any thoughts to add?
I guess the way that I see it with my middle school students is that like what's happening today, like it's so present for them, but also it's so difficult for them to see past what's happening that afternoon. Like there was one class where we were reading Holes, and we were about to read the scene where Stanley's great great grandfather comes over from Latvia. So I just kind of naively asked, like, have any of like you all have like relatives who've come over to the United States, right? And then there were a few who just like, yes, but they all have their papers. I was like, oh, I kind of forgot about like that's what's happening now. Like I was willing to just let this be like a question about a book, and then I forgot about what's happening outside of our classroom walls. And then it's like later in that period, it's like, oh, like I need to do my hair for lunch because the boy that I like is down there. And it's like it's although it's on their minds, it's also like they have more pressing concerns to them. And it's just interesting to see the balance of it, that like they know that like so much is going on in the world outside, but to them it holds equal importance to what's going on in their social lives, what's going on with their friend groups. And when I think back to when I was in middle school, I felt the exact same way. It was like nothing was more important than like having the right friends or like getting along with people. And I like it was so hard for me to see like past the weekend. And now I'm seeing that play out again with my students. It's just so interesting to see how that is with them.
Yeah, I certainly don't ignore the real world. The difference with me is that most of my students these days are 9 and 10 years old. But they know more than we think that they do. They're paying attention to the TVs and the conversations around the kitchen table. I typically wait until they bring it up, and they will bring it up, whether or not it's someone saying, Mr. Pete, how do you spell Palestine? And then I write it on the board. And then all the students at that point end up putting that word into what they're writing, or a student will be very frank with me and, ask me what I think, or do I believe X, Y, or Z? And even if they ask me and look up at me with their big eyes, wanting to know, I'm going to tell them who I am. So that's my kind of approach to it. But it's a little bit tricky when I'm sort of a visitor in the building, and that's just, a lot of times schools will ignore things or just hope they go away like that. And they don't, of course, because like you said, history repeats itself, but so does hope. So, and I try to bring in poems of hope and ask them what, to write about it. And eventually we'll bring in visual art that sort of almost invites them to, go there once they realize that, what's this painting with all these different flags of all these different nations? What's going on there? And why are these three kids holding this particular flag, not playing with the other kids? So there's ways for me to bring conversation to the page without me being too sort of direct about it, or or heavy-handed, I guess. With high school kids, how it's like, how can you not? I mean, they're bringing it in, you know what I mean? Like if you don't talk about them, they're gonna call you out on it and say, "What are you blind?" You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. Um, we have a little bit of time left. I think if it's okay with our panelists, we'll go to about 10 after with Q&A questions. If anybody's not able to stay on, we will share a recording of this in the magazine, so feel free to return later to hear the rest. But I want to ask first, let's see, we have an anonymous question. How do you handle students who have an apprehension to writing poetry?
I can go. I'm sure everybody has a comment on this one. My good friend Donna DiBenedetti and I used to say to our students, because we both would teach these creative writing activities, that this is forced creativity. We know it's forced creativity time. And so I would just sort of prepare my students for that. I usually had one activity a week or something, and I would say, okay, it's forced creativity time. We're going to do it. And then I would always say, even if you hate this, just write. You can write that you don't like this, but then just keep writing during the time. And even if in the course of our forced creativity time, you only come out with one line, with one phrase that feels like your voice, that feels kind of like a true, authentic, new thing that you wrote down, then it's a win. Like that's it, right? So just I give a lot of talk, I think, before I even start doing creative writing lessons, just around that, about how I feel reluctant sometimes to write. I don't always want to do it. But when it's time, you just try it, you see what happens. Maybe on a given day, nothing happens. Okay, fine. But then still be open to it the next time we try it. So that's kind of my approach. I don't know about you two.
I think that for me, my approach is like trying to demystify poetry a little bit. I think that students can kind of get in the mindset of like a poem is something that's not supposed to be understood. It's supposed to be highbrow. It's supposed to be something like it's supposed to be fancy writing. And I try to get students to say, no, poetry can be accessible. Poetry is for everyone. And this year we read The Crossover by Kwame Alexander, which is a novel written in verse. And like there's poems that are written as text conversations. There's poems with just 2 words per line. And like my students were looking at them and they're like, these count as poems? These are poems? And I'm like, yes, this is poetry right here. And so when we did a project at the end of that where we wrote our own poetry, like they wrote poems as text messages and they wrote poems that were like dictionary definitions. And I was like, yes, this is poetry. It doesn't have to be something with huge long words and like something where there's multiple different hidden meanings. Like it can just be this definition and what this word means to you. It can be these 2 words per line and getting a rhythm to each line. Poetry does not need to be something scary. It can be something fun.
Yeah, my approach is, like, here's a piece of paper, it's your choice. The classroom teacher might have a different, if the kid is being stubborn or reluctant or whatever the case may be, they sometimes will come in a little heavier than I do, but I try to always stay sort of um, you know, as a kind of a special guest, or I want to be liked because when they like you, then you have that advantage. So I just encourage them, like, if you don't want to write today, that's okay. If you're not feeling good, put your head down, come back 5 minutes later. How you feeling? Just sort of check in. Eventually, I mean, I'm not saying I've never had a kid who's never written a poem because that would probably be untrue, but the program that I belong to, like a big part of us, one of our transactional outcomes is a book at each school. And, at a certain point when I start talking about publication, we don't want to leave anybody out. So I would, if a kid is that resistant after a number of weeks, I would try to do a one-on-one with them. And, there's probably a reason why they don't like writing. Like everybody in this room at one point has probably experienced the difficulty of writing. So I've just tried to be open and sensitive to that. Um, yeah.
So we have two more questions. First, just a quick question for you, Peter, from Cynthia. Cynthia says, "Thank you for this valuable discussion. Peter, I work with 9-year-olds as well. Which specific poems from Richard Wright and Langston Hughes do your young students respond to?"
So in the essay, it's a poem called Red Clay Blues about, how they miss, they're up north and they're thinking about uh, the red clay dirt or mud of Georgia. So that's a poem. That's the blues poem that is I use as a model. Um, you know, Other Langston Hughes poems that I've used, the poem about the beautiful people. I can't remember the title of that poem. Um, what other poem by Langston Hughes do I use? A Dream Deferred. I've used that over the years here and there. But yeah, Red Clay Blues is in the essay that I wrote.
Cool. Thank
But
you.
here again, I would, like get other 9 or 9-year-old poets and use, Cynthia, hit me up. I could hit you with your inbox. I'll fill it with uh, beautiful, sublime poems written by third graders.
And then I have a closing question for us from the chat. This question, I love the idea of play and playfulness, which Peter mentioned. I would love to hear the panelists talk about the importance of play in creative writing and how they might bring that into their classrooms.
I think I'm probably at the advantage here because play is at the center of my approach to um, having kids find their way to poetry and to even the blues or to more serious subjects. So to me, like where the model poems from peers are really important. You also, for me, and I like to model playfulness and silliness, which, it might be hard for someone nearing 60 to stay sort of playful and in touch with their inner child. Um, for me, it's not. I mean, I just sort of go in and act the fool, and, I could be carrying an empty box one day in my hands and having them write about it and what's inside of it. And then the next week come in wearing it as a hat and just saying, "Do you like my hat?" That sort of thing. So like I just try to like break in to their childhoods by just through mere silliness and just trying to be a big kid beside them. Again, it's a little bit harder to do that when your students are 16 and 17 and but I'm sure there's ways to be playful with them still. And if we're here we're fostering invention and the imagination. I mean, play and creative writing. I mean, if you go to Freud's famous essay about that, there's connections between the two, and what's more serious than watching, a child play with their little action figures. I mean, they're doing what writers do as adults. They're building a world, they're battling good and evil, and so it's right. It's already right there. You just have to sort of acknowledge it and then engage with it.
And I think when it comes to the high school level, giving them permission to play is one thing that I feel like I really need to do, especially, I mean, for most of my career, I was teaching seniors, and this past year I've been teaching college students, but so much of what they write has to be, it's like a college admissions essay or an essay analysis or something that just feels very formal and like they have to use all the right words. And so when we have our creative writing time, which I make sure that we have, I kind of tell them this is your chance to play around. The stakes are low, it's just for you. So you can do whatever you want. And then kind of giving them some models too, and writing with them. I usually say, I'm going to write right now with you too. And I set the timer and we're all writing. And then I will say, like, I don't know why, but I'm writing a breakup poem. My marriage is fine, nobody worry, but like, I'm writing for some reason, this is what I've got. And so I just joke around with them and chat about things and just show them that this is fun. It's just fun to play with words and bring these things together. And I make sure that I tell them I'm giving them this space to do that because I know how much pressure they feel in other areas, and they need to play. They don't do the action figures anymore, but they mentally kind of do. They emotionally need that sort of release and play. So I talk about that. I think that's how I try to bring that in.
And I'm kind of right in the middle because I'm a middle school teacher, and middle schoolers are just, they're all kind of weird. I mean, think about yourself in middle school. You had no clue who you were. You're like, the jokes were weird. Like you're trying to make yourself into somebody, but you have no idea who that somebody is. So it's just a very weird time for everybody. And in order to be successful in middle school, teaching middle school, you kind of have to be a little weird, meet them on their level, let things be a little strange, a little silly, a little fun. Like, just you have to have that kind of middle school sense of humor. You need to be able to just see, like, instead of shutting things down and being like, no, like, don't say that, like, you're being weird right now, just be like, okay, let's roll with that. Let's keep that conversation going. It's a little weird, but we're going to keep it going. So I think that with middle school, you do get to have a lot of fun just from letting them be themselves. And it's kind of that last moment of them kind of being kids before they become teenagers, and that's like, oh no, I'm too cool for that. Like in sixth, seventh, by eighth grade they're getting a little too cool for it, but like sixth and seventh grade they're not quite too cool for things yet. So you're still able to have fun and be creative with them and just let them open up and let them enjoy themselves. Like for one of the poems that we wrote this year, there was a student who was like, Miss, I want to write a poem about Wingstop and how much I love Wingstop. And I was like, go for it. That's great. I love Wingstop too. And she wrote this great poem about how much she loved Wingstop. And I was like, if like in elementary or high school, that might not have happened, but middle school, like that's where weird things like that happen. And it can be really, really fun to see it happen.
Awesome. I think Wingstop is a perfect note to end on. Kristen, Anna, Peter, thank you all so much for carving out time to speak today, for your essays and the wisdom that you've shared. For everybody in the audience, I encourage you again to please check out their essays at teachersandwritersmagazine.org. That link is in the chat. Also, we'll open for submissions for the Bechtel Prize again, probably around October, so keep an eye out for that. And just thank you to everybody who joined us today. Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you so much for hosting us, Joshua, and thank you everybody for making this possible for us to come together and talk about what we do.
Thank you.
Thank you.